The sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple. A chill wind swept across the overgrown lawn, rustling the leaves of the ancient oak tree that stood sentinel at the edge of the property. It was a melancholic beauty, one that hinted at forgotten stories and secrets buried deep. I shivered, pulling my jacket tighter around me as I approached Aunty Ruth's estate. It had been years since my last visit, years spent trying to outrun the whispers of the past that clung to this place like cobwebs. Alice's words echoed in my ears, a stark reminder of why I was here. "She needs you," she had pleaded, her voice thick with concern. Aunty Ruth, our eccentric aunt, the keeper of family legends and lore, was fading. Her once sharp mind was now clouded with confusion, her days and nights blending together in a hazy tapestry of forgotten memories. The weight of responsibility settled heavily on my shoulders. How could I, someone who had spent a lifetime avoiding the shadows of this place, possibly offer her solace in her final years? As I reached the front gate, a shiver ran down my spine. The iron was cold beneath my touch, as though the metal itself held the chill of countless winters. I hesitated, my hand hovering over the rusted latch. A wave of unease washed over me, a primal instinct screaming at me to turn back, to run while I still could. But I pushed the gate open, the hinges groaning in protest, and stepped onto the grounds of Aunty Ruth's estate. There was an oppressive silence that hung heavy in the air, broken only by the distant cawing of crows. The old house loomed before me, its windows dark and lifeless. It was a place frozen in time, a mausoleum of memories both cherished and feared. As I made my way up the overgrown path, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was stepping not just into Aunty Ruth's home, but into the heart of a mystery that had haunted my family for generations. Alice had given me specific instructions on how to find the spare key. Under the cracked clay pot by the withered rose bush, she had said, I found the pot easily enough, its surface covered in moss and lichen. As I reached for it, a movement in the shadows caught my eye. I turned, my heart pounding in my chest, but there was nothing there, just the wind rustling the leaves of the overgrown rose bush. Taking a deep breath, I told myself it was just my nerves. I slipped my fingers beneath the rim of the pot and felt something cold and metallic. The key, it was heavier than I expected, and as I pulled it free, a fine layer of dust rose into the air, swirling around me like a phantom. I could almost feel the weight of the past pressing in on me, the secrets of this house whispering on the breeze. The front door was a heavy oak affair, its surface weathered and cracked. The key turned in the lock with a sickening crunch, and the door creaked open as if reluctant to reveal its secrets. A musty smell wafted out, the scent of decay and forgotten things. I stepped inside, my hand trembling slightly as I fumbled for the light switch. The foyer was plunged into darkness. I flicked the switch again and again, but the overhead chandelier remained stubbornly unlit. A wave of dizziness washed over me, the air thick and heavy, making it difficult to breathe. It was as though the house itself was holding its breath, watching me, waiting. I pulled out my phone, its screen casting a faint glow in the gloom, and used it as a makeshift flashlight. Dust covered every surface, a thick layer that spoke of years of neglect. Cobwebs hung from the ceiling, and the air was heavy with the silence of abandonment. I could hear the blood pounding in my ears, the only sound in the oppressive stillness. I took a tentative step forward, my shoes crunching on the dusty floorboards. The shadows seemed to deepen as I moved through the house, stretching out like grasping claws. Each room I entered was a snapshot of a life lived and then forgotten. The living room, with its faded floral wallpaper and dusty grand piano, still held the ghost of Aunty Ruth's laughter. The dining room, its long mahogany table covered in a white sheet, seemed to echo with the whispers of family gatherings long past. I found myself drawn to the staircase, its polished banister cold beneath my touch. As I made my way up the steps, each creak and groan of the old wood seemed to amplify the silence. The air grew colder as I ascended, sending a shiver down my spine. The shadows seemed to dance and twist in the dim light filtering through the grimy windows. The upstairs hallway was dark and narrow, the doors leading off it closed and forbidding. I hesitated outside one room, drawn by a faint, sweet scent that seemed to emanate from within. It smelled of lavender and old books, a comforting aroma that belied the unsettling atmosphere of the house. Pushing the door open, I found myself in what must have been Aunty Ruth's bedroom. It was a surprisingly cheerful room with floral curtains and a patchwork quilt on the bed. A bookshelf stood against one wall, filled with well-worn volumes, but it was the collection of dolls arranged on a small table by the window that caught my attention. They were porcelain dolls, dressed in antique clothing, their painted faces frozen in expressions of eerie serenity. I remembered them from my childhood, these silent sentinels that had watched over countless nights spent in this house. Back then, they had filled me with a sense of wonder and unease in equal measure. Now, standing here in the fading light, they seemed to be watching me, their painted eyes following my every move. A chill ran down my spine as I stepped further into Aunty Ruth's bedroom. The dolls were unsettling, yes, but something else held my gaze. Above the fireplace, a large, ornate portrait dominated the room. It depicted a young woman. Her eyes, a startling shade of green, seemed to pierce through me. She wore a dress of deep crimson, a stark contrast to her pale skin, and a single ruby pendant rested at the base of her throat. The woman in the portrait was beautiful, undeniably so, but there was a sadness in her eyes, a haunting melancholy that seemed to seep from the canvas and into the very air of the room. I found myself holding my breath, as if afraid to break the spell that seemed to hold the room captive. Who was this woman, and why did her presence feel so heavy, so familiar? As I moved closer, drawn in by those mesmerizing eyes, I noticed something strange. The woman in the portrait seemed to be looking directly at me, a gaze following my every move. I shook my head, trying to dispel the unsettling feeling that was creeping over me. It was just a trick of the light, I told myself, the way the shadows fell on the canvas. But even as I tried to rationalize it, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. The room seemed to close in around me, the air thick with unspoken words and long-forgotten secrets. I could almost hear the whisper of silk skirts, the soft click of heels on the wooden floor. I turned away from the portrait, my heart pounding in my chest, desperate to break free from the suffocating atmosphere of the room. Fleeing Aunty Ruth's bedroom, I found myself drawn towards the window. It overlooked the gardens, once a source of pride and joy for my aunt, now a tangled wilderness of overgrown shrubs and wildflowers. The sun was beginning to set, casting long shadows across the untamed landscape. It was a scene both beautiful and melancholic, a visual representation of the passage of time and the relentless grip of nature. Despite the encroaching darkness, I felt a strange pull towards the garden. It was as if the house itself was urging me to leave its confines, to seek solace in the open air. I needed to escape the oppressive atmosphere of the house, the weight of its secrets pressing down on me like a physical burden. As I made my way downstairs, I noticed a set of French doors leading out from the drawing room. They were partially obscured by heavy velvet curtains, but a sliver of light peeked through, beckoning me forward. I pushed the curtains aside and stepped out onto the flagstone patio. The air was cooler here, fresher, carrying with it the scent of damp earth and blooming jasmine. I took a deep breath, filling my lungs with the sweet, earthy fragrance. It was as if the garden itself was offering me a moment of respite from the unsettling atmosphere of the house. I wandered deeper into the garden, drawn by the promise of peace and tranquility. The further I walked, the more the oppressive atmosphere of the house seemed to fade. I felt a sense of calm wash over me, a sense of being grounded in the natural world. The whispers in the walls, the unsettling feeling of being watched, all seemed to dissipate in the face of the garden's embrace. As I walked, I found myself drawn to a small clearing at the edge of the garden. In the center stood an ancient oak tree, its branches reaching out like protective arms. Beneath its canopy, a stone bench offered a place to rest. I sat down, closing my eyes for a moment and letting the sounds of the garden wash over me. The gentle rustling of leaves in the breeze, the chirping of crickets hidden in the grass, the distant call of a mourning dove, all combined to create a symphony of nature that soothed my troubled mind. I could feel the tension draining from my shoulders, the weight of the house lifting from my chest. But as the last rays of sunlight faded from the sky, plunging the garden into shadow, I became aware of a new sound. It was a faint whispering coming from somewhere deep within the house. It was a low, mournful sound, like the wind sighing through the trees, but there was something undeniably human about it. My eyes flew open and I strained to hear over the sounds of the night. The whispering grew louder, more insistent, as if someone was trying to get my attention. Fear tightened its grip on my chest, sending a shiver down my spine. I could feel my heart pounding in my ears, my breath catching in my throat. The whispering seemed to be coming from everywhere and nowhere at once, swirling around me like the leaves caught in a sudden gust of wind. I couldn't make out any distinct words, just the mournful cadence of a voice carried on the breeze. My pulse quickened, a primal fear taking root in the pit of my stomach. Was it the wind playing tricks on me, or was it something more sinister, something tethered to the secrets of this house? My gaze darted around the darkening garden, searching for the source of the sound. Shadows stretched from the trees like long grasping fingers, and the once welcoming embrace of the oak tree now felt oppressive, suffocating. I gripped the edges of the stone bench, my knuckles turning white as the whispering intensified. And then I saw her, a young girl, no more than 8 or 9, materialized from the shadows near the house. Her long dark hair framed a pale, heart-shaped face, and her eyes, wide and luminous, seemed to glow in the fading light. She wore a simple white dress that billowed around her like a wisp of smoke. She didn't walk so much as glide towards me, her bare feet seeming to float above the ground. As she drew closer, the whispering resolved into a single word, repeated over and over again, like a mournful mantra. Help, help, help. Terror rooted me to the spot. My breath hitched in my throat and a cold sweat prickled my skin. Every instinct screamed at me to run, to flee back to the supposed safety of the house. But I was paralyzed, caught in the thrall of the girl's eerie gaze. She stopped a few feet away from me, her small hands clasped in front of her as if in prayer. The word help continued to tumble from her lips. But it was no longer a whisper, it was a low, keening wail that seemed to pierce straight through me, chilling me to the bone. "Who are you?" I managed to stammer, my voice barely a croak. The girl didn't answer. She just continued to stare at me with those unnervingly intelligent eyes, her expression a mixture of sadness and pleading. I tried to look away to break the spell that seemed to hold me captive, but it was no use. It was like those eyes were windows into my very soul, seeing my deepest fears and darkest secrets. Then, as abruptly as it began, the wailing stopped. The girl's expression softened and a hint of a smile touched her lips. She reached out a hand towards me, her touch surprisingly warm and solid for someone who seemed to exist on the edge of reality. "Come," she whispered, her voice now as sweet and innocent as a child's. "It's time for dinner." I don't remember moving, but somehow I found myself standing. The girl took my hand, her grip surprisingly strong, and led me back towards the house. My mind reeled, trying to make sense of what was happening, but it was like a part of me, the rational part, had simply shut down. We entered the house through the French doors, and as soon as we were inside, the oppressive atmosphere seemed to intensify. The air grew thick and heavy, and the shadows seemed to dance and writhe with a life of their own. The girl led me to the dining room, where a fire now blazed merrily in the hearth, casting dancing shadows across the walls. The long mahogany table was set for two, with gleaming silverware and crystal glasses. A delicious aroma filled the air, something warm and savory that made my stomach rumble despite my fear. I hesitated at the threshold, a sudden wave of dizziness washing over me. The last thing I remembered was sitting on the stone bench in the garden, the sun setting, the girl's hand reaching for mine. How much time had passed? What had happened? As if reading my thoughts, the girl turned to me, a knowing smile on her lips. "Don't worry," she whispered. "It's always like this here. Time moves differently in this house." The girl gestured towards one of the chairs, her smile widening. "Please, sit," she insisted, her voice echoing strangely in the cavernous dining room. "You must be famished." My legs felt heavy, as if filled with lead, but I obeyed, lowering myself onto the plush velvet seat. The girl took her place opposite me, her small hands resting delicately on the table. As soon as we were both seated, steaming platters of food materialized as if from thin air, filling the table with an impossible feast. Roasted meats glistened under a sheen of savory gravy, mashed potatoes piled high next to glistening green beans, and a crystal bowl overflowed with ripe, jewel-toned fruit. My senses reeled at the sight, the aroma making my mouth water, despite the knot of fear twisting in my gut. "Eat," the girl urged, her eyes sparkling with an unsettling intensity. "It's not every day we have a guest." I picked up my fork, my hand trembling slightly, and took a tentative bite of the food. It was delicious. the flavors exploding on my tongue, erasing the metallic tang of fear that had lingered in my mouth. But even as I ate, a nagging unease gnawed at the edges of my mind. Where had this food come from? And who or what was I sharing this bizarre, unsettling meal with? Glancing at the girl across from me, I noticed that she wasn't eating. She simply watched me, her chin resting on her hands, a small, enigmatic smile playing on her lips. Her gaze was unnerving, as if she knew something I didn't, something she wasn't yet ready to reveal. "The woman in the portrait," I began, my voice barely a whisper. "Who is she?" The question seemed to hang in the air between us, heavy with unspoken meaning. The girl's smile faltered for a moment, a flicker of something unreadable crossing her features. "She was once like you," she replied, her voice barely audible above the crackling of the fire, lost and searching for answers. Her words sent a chill down my spine. "What happened to her?" I pressed, my heart pounding against my ribs. The girl tilted her head, her eyes boring into mine. "Don't you remember?" she asked softly, her voice laced with an ancient wisdom that belied her youthful appearance. I shook my head, my mind a jumble of fragmented thoughts and half-remembered dreams. The food in my stomach suddenly felt heavy, like a lead weight pulling me down. I pushed back from the table, a wave of dizziness washing over me. "I need to leave," I muttered, my voice hoarse. I need to get some air." As I stumbled towards the door, I glanced back at the portrait above the fireplace. To my horror, it was empty. The canvas, once filled with the haunting image of the green-eyed woman, was now blank, as if she had never existed. Panic surged through me, cold and sharp, as I stumbled out of the dining room and into the darkened hallway. My breath came in ragged gasps, each inhale a struggle against the suffocating atmosphere of the house. I had to get out, escape the suffocating grip of this place before it swallowed me whole. The air hung heavy, thick with the scent of dust and decay as I groped my way through the unfamiliar halls. Shadows stretched and writhed around me, taunting me with fleeting glimpses of movement that vanished as quickly as they appeared. The house seemed to press in on me, the silence broken only by the frantic pounding of my own heart. I could feel eyes on me, watching, waiting. The sense of being observed, hunted, intensified with each step I took. And then, from somewhere deep within the bowels of the house, a clock began to chime. 1, 2, 3, the sound echoing eerily through the silent halls. But as the chimes continued, I realized, with a growing sense of horror, that they weren't stopping at 12, 13, 14, 15. The clock continued its relentless count, each chime a hammer blow to my already frayed nerves. Time itself seemed to warp and distort within the walls of this house, subject to its own sinister rules. Driven by a primal need to escape, I ran blindly down the hallway, the sound of the clock's eerie chimes echoing behind me. Each footfall felt heavy, as if I were wading through thick mud, my lungs burning with each desperate gasp for air. But the house seemed to stretch on forever, the corridor twisting and turning in a dizzying labyrinth of despair. As I rounded a sharp corner, I slammed into something solid, sending me sprawling to the floor. Gasping for breath, I looked up, my heart pounding against my ribs. Standing before me, their faces illuminated by the eerie glow of the moon filtering through a nearby window, were 3 children. They were dressed in clothes that looked as though they'd been pulled from another era, their eyes wide and unblinking, reflecting the moonlight like tiny, polished stones. They didn't speak, didn't move, just stood there, their gazes fixed on me with an intensity that sent shivers down my spine. Hello? I stammered, my voice a dry rasp in the stillness. The children remained silent, their expressions unchanging, their stillness more unsettling than any threat. I scrambled back, my hand scraping against the rough wooden floorboards. I needed to get away from these things, these phantoms that seemed to suck the very air from my lungs. Scrambling to my feet, I stumbled past the children, their ghostly forms shimmering slightly as I brushed against them. A new wave of panic surged through me, urging me forward as I careened through the house, desperate for an escape from this nightmare. I burst through a set of French doors at the end of a hallway, the cool night air hitting me like a physical blow. I had no idea where I was, only that I had to get as far away from that house as possible. But as I stumbled across the overgrown lawn, my lungs burning, my legs screaming for respite, I realized, with a sickening lurch in my stomach, that I wasn't free. Before me, shrouded in the shadows of the looming house, lay a graveyard. It was small, hidden from view, the weathered headstones leaning precariously as if on the verge of being swallowed whole by the encroaching darkness. A sense of foreboding washed over me, cold and suffocating, as I recognized the names etched into the weathered stone. They were the names of children who had lived and died on this cursed land, their spirits now trapped within the crumbling walls of the house and the shadows of this forgotten graveyard. A strangled cry escaped my lips as I stumbled back from the graveyard, my mind rebelling against the horrors unfolding around me. I could feel the pull of the house, the insidious whispers beckoning me back into its depths. But I knew, with a certainty that defied logic, that if I stepped foot inside that house again, I would never escape its clutches. Turning, I ran, my lungs burning, my legs heavy and leaden. Thorns tore at my clothes, branches whipped at my face, but I didn't dare slow down, not even for a second. The house loomed behind me, a dark and twisted silhouette against the moonlit sky, and I could sense its malevolent gaze following my every move. I don't know how long I ran, how long I stumbled through the darkness, driven by pure, primal terror. Time seemed to lose all meaning, stretching and contracting like a rubber band on the verge of snapping. But just when I thought my legs would give out, just when I was about to succumb to the despair that threatened to consume me, I saw it. A light, a single flickering light in the distance, a beacon of hope in the suffocating darkness. With renewed determination, I surged forward, my heart pounding against my ribs, my breath coming in ragged gasps. As I drew closer, I could make out the outline of a car, its engine idling, the driver's side door hanging open in silent invitation. I collapsed into the driver's seat, my body trembling with exhaustion and the lingering echoes of fear. The world outside the car seemed to spin, the familiar scent of pine needles and damp earth replaced by the lingering aroma of decay and dust that clung to my clothes, my hair, my very skin. My fingers fumbled with the keys, the engine roaring to life, a symphony of normalcy in the cacophony of my terror. Pulling away from that desolate stretch of road, I glanced back at the house, its silhouette receding into the darkness. Even from a distance, I could feel its malevolent gaze upon me, the unseen eyes of the children watching, waiting. The clock's eerie chimes echoed in my ears, a constant reminder that time held no sway within those haunted walls. The drive back to civilization was a blur. My mind struggling to reconcile the events of the past. How long had it been? Hours? Days? Time, as the girl had warned, moved differently in the house. Each passing mile brought a sliver of relief, the familiar sights and sounds of the city a soothing balm to my frazzled nerves. But the sanctuary of my own apartment, once a haven of peace, now felt tainted, the shadows holding the lurking fear of unseen eyes. I slept fitfully that night, haunted by fragmented dreams of whispering children and the haunting gaze of the woman in the vanished portrait. The aroma of decay lingered, a phantom scent that clung to my clothes, no matter how many times I washed them. The world outside my window seemed too bright, the sounds too sharp, my senses heightened, attuned to every creak and groan of my building, every rustle of leaves outside my window. Days turned into weeks, and the sharp edges of fear gradually dulled, replaced by a lingering unease that colored my every waking moment. I threw myself into my work, seeking solace in the mundane, the routine, anything to keep the shadows at bay. But the house and its inhabitants remained imprinted on the back of my eyelids, a constant reminder of the darkness that lay just beneath the surface of reality. I tried to talk about it, to share the burden of that night with someone, anyone. But words failed me. The terror I experienced too profound, too surreal to translate into coherent sentences. How could I possibly explain the feeling of time slipping away, the unease of a shared meal with a ghost child, the chilling realization that I'd been teetering on the precipice of madness? So I kept it locked away, a dark secret buried deep within, a haunted memory that cast a long shadow over my life. The experience left me wary, distrustful of my own perceptions. The line between reality and nightmare blurred beyond recognition. The world felt different somehow, the ordinary tinged with an unsettling sense of the uncanny. And sometimes late at night, when the city sleeps and the shadows stretch, I hear a faint knocking at my door. It's a gentle sound, almost hesitant, like a child testing the boundaries of a forbidden game. And in those moments, a chill runs down my spine, and I'm drawn back to that desolate stretch of road, to the house that stands silent and watchful, its secrets waiting to claim another soul.